Hello everyone. I'm Roman Polnar, and on behalf of the Hebrew Free Loans Business Circle, I'm delighted to welcome you to a series of conversations with experts in our community who have offered to share their knowledge and resources with us. Now, Hebrew Free Loan has been supporting our Northern California Jewish community for 123 years, and this series is another way to support our community. Each person we're speaking with is a business owner with real-world experience, and they volunteer to share their insights and expertise from their field that may help you navigate whatever challenges you may be facing in your own life or business, and they're here to answer your questions directly. Look, we're all living through a difficult time. As the pandemic wears on, we remain isolated and cut off from family, friends, and our broader social networks. A lot of people are facing challenges and major overwhelm. And just when we need our support systems and networks the most, it's harder than ever to access them. And that's why we created this monthly series of conversations called Food for Thought with Professionals in Our Community. And today I'm excited to welcome Leah Rosenthal-Cambick, who's the owner and director of Kid Time, an absolutely wonderful preschool with 3 Bay Area locations. And she'll talk about how the pandemic has affected families and offer tips on how to navigate remote learning, relieving quarantine stress, helping kids fight boredom, and offer advice to parents and grandparents on keeping themselves and their kids engaged. So Leah, welcome to Food for Thought.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Leah. It's great to have you here. So perhaps you could start by telling us a little bit about yourself and tell us about Kid Time.
Sure. I have been with Kid Time for 22 years. I started there when it was a small preschool with 40 children in Walnut Creek, and became engaged with HFLA when we were expanding to a larger facility and growing due to high demand for childcare. And so we took out an HFLA loan in 2013. And since then, we've now expanded to 2 more locations. We have 2 preschools and an aftercare, which this year is now a distance learning program for our school age daycare families. So it's been obviously a really kind of whirlwind year. I was laughing this morning because Roman and we did an interview like this back in March, and I had to go to my school because it was quieter there. And today I had to come home because my school is no longer quiet, and it's quiet at my house because now my son is at distance learning. So of course now there's gardeners behind me, so I apologize for that. Hopefully that won't take very long. But yeah, we've been operating throughout the pandemic with right now we've got about 140 families in all 3 of our programs enrolled. And it's been quite a year. A lot of, holding people's hands and making them feel comfortable to come back to school. Parents are really struggling, and we're, just happy we've been able to help out as much as we can this year for people.
Well, this is a very important topic and conversation that affects virtually everybody, but especially those that have kids at home. And I think it's fair to say that, this far into the pandemic, tensions are running pretty high in a lot of households, and especially those with young kids, with a lot of parents feeling frustrated with their kids being stuck at home, which is hard on everybody. So I wanted to ask, what effects do you see on how families are functioning, during this pandemic?
Oh, so very many different directions you can go with that question. I think this year has caused a lot of families to slow their lives down
Mm.
substantially. I know my calendar went from insane to really there's nothing on the weekends, there's nothing on the evenings anymore. For some parents, that translates to I work from home, so now I work all the time, and it's really hard to shut it off. And for other families that have found, care for their children during the day, or if their schools are open, there's new routines and just so much more to navigate. Um, I think one of the major effects I've seen is in behavior, because children act out when things are not the norm and when they're not in the status quo, just like adults do. We like to think that we have it together better than they do, but I don't think that's true. I think for the most part, their behaviors are louder and perhaps more obnoxious than ours would be, but they're reacting to the same stressors that we are. Um, And so we've had a lot of conversations with parents this year about still holding your boundaries and still holding your limits at home, because our children were really taken out of, their entire lives and plopped into some other version of what they're used to. Um, and I think this has been a really interesting year for really teaching our kids real life coping skills. I know a lot of parents are worried about school and they're not learning as well. And, this distance is really difficult for some children. And that's absolutely the case. But I think the silver lining is that if we can slow things down and show them, that we too cannot hide our frustration 24/7. We are navigating this as well. And I know I've had lots of conversations with my own child about this is frustrating. I'm sorry your birthday was boring. I'm sorry that, we're all bored out of our minds here, but we have to make the best of it. So I think that's sort of the upside is it's allowed families to kind of take a harder look at how do I set up my life? And, I wonder when we come back to more of a normal life and routine, will people jump back into the craziness that they had before, or are people slowing down? I will also add that I think it's had a great effect on mothers. Not that dads aren't affected too, but women seem to be the ones that are either leaving jobs or, having to take on more um, during this time. And so, really, we've been supporting moms a lot and just kind of making them comfortable.
Absolutely. You've mentioned from the very very beginning to say that both, especially kids, sort of act out in response to what's going on. Obviously, we do our best to hold things together, but I've heard a lot of parents say that their kids are just really trying their patience, and they are acting out. So, what would you say to parents who are experiencing some of these challenges, behavioral challenges from their kids?
Well, patience is something I'm asked about a lot as a preschool teacher and director. Everybody always, that's their first question. Oh, how do you have the patience to deal with all of those kids? And one thing I always like to tell parents, and this sort of can help reframe it, I think, is you don't have to be patient with a child when you understand where they are. And if you can put yourself in their shoes, and adults, we like to say at kid time, adults have childhood amnesia. Often we've just totally forgotten everything we knew as children and what was important and what we needed to feel safe. And if we put ourselves in their shoes and recognize they've lost, their social network, they've lost their ability to be free and flexible, they've lost, you know, FaceTime with their teachers, and having one-on-one in-person teaching is so difficult to navigate, that you can kind of look at those annoying behaviors and realize, what, I understand why you're doing these things, and that makes me considerably less frustrated. And I think parents in the house often were tagging each other and reminding each other of that, because, none of us planned on, well, I don't know, maybe some people did. I never planned on being home all the time with my entire family all day long. That was not my intention. And neither did they. So, sometimes it's, me tagging my husband out and saying, maybe you need to go take a walk and I'll help G with his homework for a little while. And seems like you need a break, and kind of pass the buck, because if he's not, being understanding, it's really difficult. And we can't expect these kids to navigate something that even we don't really have the ability to navigate.
Well, let's focus on the kids for a little bit. And, when they act out, I know when we spoke before, you'd mentioned that's just one of the ways in which they're either asking for attention and they're showing something is happening. What kind of behaviors or sort of behavioral triggers should we as parents or grandparents be on the lookout for?
Well, I know a lot of the behaviors that I see, there's sort of the two sets, right? There's preschool and school age. Anybody under 5, we see more potty accidents. We see regression in that area. We see regression in eating, being willing to try things, and we say in our field that kids can control really only two things. That's what goes in and what comes out. So when they're looking for control, those are places that they can lock down on the
Mm.
control. We see more power struggles over silly things, a child getting upset over something that is clearly impossible. Well, no, I want this. Well, this is where we are now. This is not a thing we can do. And then when you get into the school age, kindergarten through fifth grade, virtual learning is not for every child. Kids are not built for this. Kids in our distance learning program, we've had kids that were not turning on their Zooms, or were putting on their Zooms but turning off their video and goofing around and playing games. And, then we find out, oh, you haven't turned in your work today. But we're expecting, and this is again, I think when you go back to understanding children, we're expecting them to manage their time in a way that adults manage their time. And that is not real life. And I can give you an example. In our distance learning program, we realized a few weeks in that the way the schools were set up, they would have a Zoom, then they would have a break. And during that break, they were supposed to be doing independent learning. And then they would do another Zoom and then a little more independent learning. Well, what we found out was kids do not work independently, which is why typically they're in a classroom with a teacher who's over their shoulder, right? So they were just basically getting lost during that time. And so we switched our day and made those times play times, and then
Mm.
added an hour of just work time at the end of the day where everyone worked at the same time. And it was like night and day. That's something we say in preschool and in childcare a lot, is control the environment, not the child. We recognize that the more we try to control them, the more, I mean, these kids are savvier on their computers than we are. They know how to hide a window and do something else. And we're over there trying to figure out how to undo it. And so if we're really setting up the environment for more
Mm.
success, we found that that's worked a lot better. And I think it just speaks to, having expectations of children that are unfair. It's really not fair to ask them to manage their time as a 35-year-old adult might at the office.
These are all very helpful tips, and they're certainly bringing a lot of the the quick movement of the mouse into mind, because I think our kids have learned how to hack virtually every password that we have. Um, but just a quick commercial break, just for those folks who are joining us live. If you have any questions or any particular topics that you'd like Leah to talk about, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll leave some time in the end, and Leah will answer your questions. All right, well, let's get back to our conversation. And Leah, let me ask you the other side of that same question, and looking at this from the parent's perspective, right? So whatever the kids' behavioral sort of changes might be, how do we as parents not only identify, but really combat some of these regressive behaviors that you mentioned earlier, without making them worse?
That's a very good question. And I think kids are built to set us up to make it worse. I think they know, the right way to say it. They know the thing that's going to bother you the most. And it's not that they're, being bad people. They're reacting to their environment, and they're usually trying to tell you something. So when I meet with parents, and we've had very many meetings this year, um, you know, the first thing I usually try to drill it down to is, what are they trying to tell us? Are they in need of attention because now you're divided because you're working from home and you're 10 times more stressed than before? Are they just socially really struggling because they miss people and their peers? I can use my son as an example. He's very tech savvy and he's very good in school. And he went about a week or 2 weeks, and we found out he hadn't been turning in any of his assignments. So he's doing his work, but he's not turning it in. And we realized, he just figured out that he could kind of get away with it. So he tried it. And going back to those real world consequences, he had 2 weeks of work to make up. And I think it was 2 or 3 nights, and he was miserable. And it was a very good, hard lesson that was hard earned. And as soon as he figured that out, now he's every day comes home and shows us what he did and that he finished. And look, I'm not going to be behind again. Um, and on the flip side, there are children that are struggling and not turning their work in, and it's because Maybe they're struggling to read and the directions on their Zooms are written in words and they're not catching it fast enough. I know we had a child that ran into that at our distance learning program, and he's getting some intervention now and some reading tutor, which was something that they didn't really realize that he needed before this year. So I think really kind of drilling down and identifying, taking our own baggage out of it as much as we can. I always want to look at my son and say, well, I know you know how to do this, so why aren't you doing it? Oh, because you're 9 and because you figured out a way to skirt the system. And if I were you and I were 9, I probably would have been doing the same thing. And I just, catch it because I know he's like me. But I think another really important resource is anyone else that is working with your children that has an objective point of view. I know I go to the director of his aftercare frequently and ask him, what's going on? Do you see this in my child? Because they behave differently at school than they do at home. And sometimes I think having that objective point of view and asking someone who's with them day to day in the classroom environment can be really valuable.
Yeah, Leah, this is something that you and I talked about before, as both parents with young kids at home. We tend to react to however they're acting, and oftentimes just because of our own, stresses at home, at work, or just with everything else going on around us, we're not our best selves,
Mhm.
and it's easy to either get too impatient or slip up and become aggressive or raise our voice faster than we might or should have,
Mhm.
or the opposite. In some cases, we become a little too lax and we let kids do certain things that are probably not good for them. So, for all of us who are not early childhood educators like yourself, this is a lot that we have to figure out on the fly. So, what would you recommend, or what would you advise parents um, to pay attention to? How do we find that balance?
I think the number one thing is consistency. The kids are really lacking that right now, and our routines are different, but we need to find as much routine as we can, because kids children need boundaries to feel safe. They need to test, they need to push that extra a little bit more to the side to see, are you going to let them get away with it? And I think it's really important that we hold those boundaries, that certain things like, meal times and bedtimes and, at schedules can be as much in place as possible. But also, we're humans, and, our job isn't to teach our children to be perfect little robots, and they're learning by modeling. So if I
Mhm.
lose it on my child because I can't believe you didn't turn that assignment in. This is ridiculous. Why are we doing homework at 9 o'clock? You should be in bed right now. It's okay for me to say to him, I am frustrated. And this is what that looks like. And the way you feel, I want you to pay attention to those feelings because you don't seem to like them either. And, circling back after the fact, these are really lifelong lessons that we're teaching our children. It is okay to get frustrated. It's okay to lose it. We are in a pandemic. We are all cooped up. There are a lot of reasons why we are extra stressed out. I mean, I'm speaking more on the piece of parents with support and working families that have double incomes, and but people are out there trying to do this on their own. you know this is difficult stuff. So I think there's nothing wrong with saying to your child, you know what, I apologize, I really lost it, and I'm sorry I yelled at you. I don't like yelling at you. However, can you understand where my frustration came from, and have that conversation. I think that is so much more important and so much more useful than trying to sort of keep yourself in this even keel all the time. It's just not possible. It's not real life.
That's a good reminder. It's not being perfect, but it's being thoughtful and having that loop back and using these moments, even if they're not ideal, as learning opportunities for our kids and for ourselves.
Absolutely.
Are there any particular either suggestions or tips that you might have, or strategies, for parents and grandparents, just getting through some of the frustrations while we're all sheltering in place?
I think we're all going to feel the frustration. I don't think there's any way around that. I think we have to accept that this is a different time and we sort of have to move from that place. And what that means is really owning your own baggage as a parent, knowing what your triggers are, knowing when you need to tag out, knowing when you need to just walk away. Parents often want to send their kids on timeout if they feel like they're not being minded or listened to. I'm a big proponent of the parent timeout because I think a lot of times we're the ones that just, you know what, I'm going to walk away from you for a few minutes. I love you and I don't want to say something that will hurt your feelings. So I'm going to go down the hall and I'm going to let you take a few minutes. And I might put on a YouTube breathing video and listen to that for a few minutes and literally just try to reset myself and then come back. Because the biggest thing you want to avoid is the reactionary response. If they are giving you reactionary behavior and you respond in a reactionary way, immediately now you're in a competition. Now you're in a power struggle. And, you're going to end up in a big fight and it's going to be ugly. So I think those moments of just saying, I'm going to just pause this right now and I'm going to walk away from you because I love you. I think that can be a very valuable 5 to 10 minute period of time. And often what happens with the child in that position is they're a little freaked out because they're expecting that you're going to go fly off the handle, you're going to yell, you're going to
Mhm.
be, and when they see you walk away and it's quiet, they're typically going to get quiet too. And they're going to maybe reflect a little bit too. So I think, really kind of owning like, I know if you don't turn in your work, it drives me crazy because I know you're a really smart child and you like school and you've never had problems in school. But as soon as my son figures out that's a trigger for me, well, that's going to be his power. So I have to really be careful about that.
They're a lot smarter than sometimes we give them credit for.
Oh,
Um, a question or a comment came in the chat that it seems appropriate. Actually, there are two. One is because I'm finding that another issue that has been a challenge for school-aged kids during the pandemic is keeping to appropriate bedtimes and getting enough sleep. Now, I know you mentioned routines are important. Do you want to weigh in on this observation?
I definitely think, yeah, it's sort of naturally happens, right? When we don't have hard boundaries in the morning and we're not commuting and all of that things can kind of slip a little bit. And I don't think there's anything wrong with building a little bit more, maybe family time on the couch in the evening, because we don't all have to start as early as normal. But I do think a consistent bedtime is very important. I think, you know, just dialing it back and saying, okay, guys, we're having a family meeting. We're going to sit down and come up with some house rules. I know my son requested an extra 15 minutes of awake time because he basically gets to sleep in an extra hour every morning. And we thought it was reasonable and we went with it. But, next year, if he has to get up and be at school at 8 o'clock again, we'll have to dial that back. But I do think it's really important. I mean, if you think of your own life as an adult, we're very routine oriented. I don't do anything until I go get my coffee and I, start my day with my certain rituals. And if the kids don't have those, I think it's more than just that it's not that it's stressful for them. It feels unsafe. And it's like, there's not really, I need somebody to say, nope, 9 o'clock, that's the time. You can go read in your room until you fall asleep. But this time is over now and it's bedtime.
Well, speaking of boundaries, Cindy has both it seems like a question and a comment, but mainly it's an important one. So Cindy's asking, can you address the challenge for parents of limiting screen time for their kids? Initially, during the pandemic, many parents loosened the restrictions because playing video games gave kids the chance to socialize with friends. Now, though, it's tough to put the genie back in the bottle. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, it sure is. Do you live at my house, Cindy? That's there. I think with the screens, I have a few sort of mixed bag feelings about the screen. I think in some ways, yes, we need to try to curtail this because it has gotten a little out of control. But I think that when you consider what are they doing on the screen, I think that's really where it makes a bigger difference to me. If I let my son watch YouTube all day, he would watch YouTube all day. He would love it. it's like watching TV. It's mindless. He's not engaging with it. He's not socializing. So we've switched on a lot of our weekend time to, if you want to be on a screen, call a friend. Who can you FaceTime with? I think that there's a ton of value in getting on just a video call with a friend. I've, heard of kids getting together and spending a couple hours on the phone, playing in their rooms, doing Legos together, drawing together. I think if we can kind of reframe what the screen use is, that's pretty important because it's true. And in my son's case, it's very true. He's a video game person and he loves to interact with the kids. And, he'll tell us, oh, I met a kid that lives in England and, this and that and the other. And that's neat and all. But the bottom line is he needs the social time. So I think some of that is we have to let go a little bit and say, all right, you know what? I'm on my screens a lot more too now because it's the only way I can see my friends and it's the only way I can step out of my normal life and, you know, have a little of that sort of social time. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think we are also have to be patient with ourselves. It's winter. We can't just kick them out in the backyard all the time anymore. And it's a real issue. But I think if you reframe it and as much as you can say, I see that you want to do that. Is there anybody available? Who can you chat with today? Who can you hook up with and play a game together, as opposed to just the mindless, hours and hours of one of my rules of thumb is if I come into the room and say something to you and you don't respond the first time, even, really one time I'm down to now, then I'm going to need you to set that device down and refocus on life and see who's home and what time is it and what day is it, because they can really get sucked into that stuff.
And I think I personally found that, especially our 7-year-old, who just doesn't respond very well to extended periods of screen time. Even if it's something that he enjoys doing, or even talking to his friends, just the screen itself ends up agitating him. And so it's really important to find that balance of, even if they're not outside, but just to do something with their hands, something that's tangible. And like you said, just get back to the reality of figuring out who's home and what day it is.
Yeah. I mean, it's like that period between sort of Christmas and New Year's where no one knows what day it is. The kids are in that every day. And
Right.
especially if they're not going to a program and they're home every day, or
Hmm.
if they're one week on at school and then the next week they're off and they're home doing distance again. That's very jarring. And I think it's just we have to be patient with them. We have to understand that that's where they are and that this is not their choice. They would be at school with their friends if they had the choice. Even the kids that don't normally want to go to school, I think they're really all missing school. They really miss that social structure that they're used to.
They really do. Well, Leah, before we get ready to wrap up, and I'm going to offer and remind folks who are on live with us, if you have any questions or any specific topics that you want Leah to address, please put them in the chat. And while you're doing that, Leah, do you have any other thoughts in closing to share with our viewers?
I think we just have to be really, like I said, give ourselves a little leniency. We're all together so much more than we're used to, and we're not able to split our time with others that maybe are more of our support system in some cases. So I think in terms of in the home and in your family, number one, it's absolutely okay to take breaks. If you just need to tell your spouse, hey, I'm going to go take a walk or drive around the block. I need a few minutes. I need some time to myself. My home is never empty anymore. So it's, if you all want to go buy cat food, I feel like I'm on vacation because I have the house to myself for 20 minutes. But I think it's really necessary to take those breaks and to recognize when you've had it and when you're not going to be able to understand your child. Um, Self-care is super important right now. And I think modeling that for our children is very important. My son has actually started doing the Peloton meditation videos because he's seen me do them. And I think it's wonderful. He'll lay on the floor and he'll play one and he'll breathe. And he usually won't do all 10 minutes, but it's a reset. And I think it's something we all kind of need to take that time to do because it can really reset our minds when the chaos is too much. Um, and even just shutting down electronics for the whole house, for periods of time. We had a TV free night last night, and we We were going to read and we were going to play a game, and we ended up just all sitting around talking, and we had a really, really nice time. And that was my son's idea. He said, "We're doing too much TV. We should turn it off." And I said, "Well, I wanted to watch the news, but okay, we'll do that tonight." And it was really a lovely way to spend the night. But I think, modeling for the children that, um, you know, none of us really feel normal right now, and that's okay. It's really okay that we all feel a little unsettled. But we do need to give ourselves grace. We're doing the best we can. And, when we first spoke, Roman, it was March, what, 10 months ago?
Mhm.
We thought we'd be long back to normal by now. And here we are still having the same conversation. But at least I think we're starting to feel maybe the light at the end of the tunnel is starting to come a little closer. I'm afraid to say it.
Certainly hope so. Fingers crossed. Well, thank you, Leah. It was wonderful to speak with you. And I know that everyone on the line really benefited from this. And I'm sure folks who are going to get this in their email will benefit from this as well. And just before we close, I'd just like to invite you to a very special opportunity to hear from a very well known and active person in the Jewish community, Craig Newmark, who's the founder of Craigslist. And this is a separate event from our Food for Thought series. And I'd like for you to mark your calendars for Thursday, March 4th at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard for a very thought-provoking dialogue with Craig about his journey from launching Craigslist to founding Craig Newmark Philanthropies, and hear his ideas about taking less and giving more in this upcoming event called From Craigslist to Philanthropist. Again, that's going to take place on Thursday, March 4th at 4 p.m. So please mark your calendars and look out for more details in your inbox. And so just before we close, I just wanted to see if anyone else had any questions or anything else that you'd want Leah to talk about. And if not, Leah, I will ask you one other question. And that is, are there any resources that you would recommend or you can leave our listeners with where we can go to learn more about just, how to get through this time in better shape and how to be better parents, better listeners, and how to help our kids get through this time as well?
My favorite reference that I give to almost every parent that asks or would like it is a book called Setting Limits for the Strong-Willed Child. And it is an excellent, wonderful, fantastic book. It helps with 2-year-olds. It helps with 10-year-olds. It is a mindset. It's a way of phrasing things, and that sort of sets up better communication with your child. I cannot say enough good things about this book, and it's very reasonable responses to things. And yeah, that's my favorite resource, and I think it helps. Don't be turned off by the strong-willed part of it, because I think every child and every human is strong-willed. We all have certain things where we dig our heels in, and this is a really, really nice. They have an Audible version and a paperback, and I can't say enough good things about it.
Thanks, Leah. And again, remind us of where your school is and where folks can find you if they want more information.
Sure. My main preschool is in Walnut Creek. It's called Kid Time. We also have Kid Time South, which is in South Walnut Creek, and we have an aftercare in Pleasant Hill. And I have a website, kidtime.co, and people can reach me through that if they ever have any questions as well.
Thank you, Leah. Well, and I want to thank everybody that joined us today. Thank you to the Business Circle and everyone that's involved. It's making our community stronger and better. And on behalf of the Business Circle and everyone at the Hebrew Free Loan, I want to thank you. And until the next time, thank you for joining us, and be well.